Welcome to UB Medicine Podcast. I'm Dr. Allison Brashear, the Dean of the Jacobs School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences at the University at Buffalo. Today's episode is all about the journey from bench to bedside, how foundational science and interdisciplinary collaboration are driving innovation and improving healthcare outcomes across Western New York. Joining me today is Dr. Mark Halterman, a physician scientist, the Senior Associate Dean for Research at the Jacobs School, and also a neurologist. His work is in neuroscience and immunology, and it exemplifies the power of curiosity-driven research and translational impact. Mark, welcome.
Thank you. It's so great to be here.
So first, we're going to just talk about basic science, the foundations, the building blocks of how we come up with new treatments. What recent breakthroughs at UB have highlighted the importance of that foundation that shapes the future of medicine?
So one thing I'd like to do is open with sort of a framework in mind. And this idea that the fundamentals of science are really to define relationships that are hiding in plain sight, measuring these relationships and understanding how they function. We seek to perturb these systems to improve health, but we can't move on those actions unless we know how the system works in the first place. So what that means for us is understanding how molecules like DNA and proteins interact, how they fold, how they move, examining how cells communicate and adapt, whether it's through aging or injury, and then asking questions about how organs in the body signal to one another, communicate, and then emerge into behaviors and more complex changes like memory, emotion, resilience. So we're really studying this cells to society level. As basic scientists, we think from the beginning and how does this propagate towards the end. So it's not lost on me that Buffalo is already steeped in history of discovery in medicine. And I'll just mention a couple of examples. From the 60s, Wilson Gretbach and William Chardak and Andrew Gage developed the first implantable cardiac pacemaker. In the 1960s, Robert Guthrie, working with his nurse aide Anna Susi, created simple heel prick tests for newborn screening and phenylketonuria. Dr. Lawrence Jacobs in the mid-90s translated basic biological observations of interferon beta into the most prescribed drug for the relapsing form of MS. And in the late 90s, Dr. Holm, Egan, and Erning developed Infisurf, which has saved the lives of thousands of premature infants. So this is a part of UB's history. It's really steeped in discovery based in basic biology.
I just wanted to put a finer point. So you and I are neurologists, right? And you just talked about some drugs that have changed the life of patients. It used to be that patients with cystic fibrosis passed away. It used to be that patients with MS became severely disabled. And of course, the heel prick was the blood spot. So, I mean, your point is that UB has been changing the landscape of healthcare in the country and frankly around the world for years. Can we just talk a little bit about how curiosity leads to real world solutions? Because, all these things, I understand that Dr. Jacobs was really curious about immunology that then led to this discovery about a new treatment for MS. So how does curiosity fit in, and particularly as you are training the next future MD PhD?
It's so important. And framing questions, developing hypotheses, proving or disproving them, the best experiments often lead to another series of questions. So as long as you keep your mind open to the possibilities that you were wrong and reinterpreting that data and letting it take you where it will, you're going to find all sorts of interesting outcomes. The current day, we find ourselves armed with a number of different techniques that we can use. And so if we think about some of the discoveries that are happening in real time, I think we can understand how some of this curiosity is developed and would translate. So thinking about Dr. Ram Samudra and Zach Falls and their work looking at the clinical problem in drug discovery. It takes too long to create drugs. It costs too much. Too many compounds fail when they get to clinical trials because we can't efficiently predict their interactions with proteins. So this CANDU model that this team developed allows us to look at millions of drug protein interactions simultaneously and thinking about these hidden relationships in these drugs and perhaps avert disaster before it happens. There's also this opportunity through Empire AI. So Tom Grant has developed a program, SWAX Fold, which allows us to look at really how proteins breathe in real time, taking these static snapshots and turning them into a more dynamic and sort of mobile sense of what is possible. And this is ultimately going to result in our being able to develop better drugs to target them. We have investigators from the Department of Microbiology like Chelsea Armbruster, who is studying the biology of catheter-associated urinary tract infections. This is a particular problem in older adults. These infections are polymicrobial, and Dr. Armbruster's team's looking at this issue of what are the microbes doing? What do biofilms do in this context? What is the enzyme urease doing in the bladder wall, and how can we target those? And this is an extraordinary collaborative effort between basic scientists and clinicians. And this is really where the magic happens. When you have this idea that's couched in a clinical problem, you take it back to the biological model, you think about ways in which you can perturb that system, and then you move forward in preclinical models and then ultimately into the clinical context.
So you listed several things, and I think all of these were really important because they're basic science questions that have grounded in clinical problems like recurrent bladder infections that cause a lot of morbidity and mortality and cost for multiple repeat admissions for older adults. The problem of drug discovery. And so I think that, the point here is that our basic scientists here at the Jacobs School are having a tremendous impact in patients in our community. So I think sometimes people not familiar with the work that you talked about, I think we're just doing experiments, but the experiments are so clinically relevant. Tell me a little bit about how you think that the investments that UB has made in the Jacobs School, particularly in things such as Empire AI and AI, will help kind of continue to drive and expedite those discoveries.
Right. So the Empire AI push and the capacity is really an extension of what's been going on at UB already, and a recognition of the importance of looking at systems as large data questions and developing the tools to be able to manage those large data sets and really crystallize the questions one is answering to be able to get to an actionable outcome. So if you think about the investments in basic science, you've already highlighted the curiosity piece. We've talked about the discovery. We haven't talked about the resilience, but of course, that always wins in many disciplines. We have to invest in the tools that we need to be able to see the invisible, right? I mentioned at the outset of the podcast, our task here is to be able to develop new ways in which we imagine these systems are working together. We have to be able to develop high-end instrumentation cores. These are force multipliers. These allow us to apply cutting-edge techniques to save time and look more deeply into the biological model. These investments power the ecosystem of the Academic Medical Center. They fuel training programs. They're driving partnerships with our hospitals. And they make us competitive on the large scale for further funding and to expand benefits in the region. And I think about the discoveries in basic science also from an economic standpoint, in that they fuel the research economy, new patents, new technologies, companies that are attracting talent to the region. It very much is a continuum.
So I think the resilience that we talked about here is incredibly important because, we're committed to training the next generation of the people who are going to make these discoveries that will follow in Dr. Jacobs' footsteps for many, many years to come, as well as the many other individuals. So I think it's just an example of how the Jacobs School is really laying the groundwork for many, many more future discoveries. You've talked about collaboration, and it is a team sport, right? That is how you do science now. Whether it's collaboration across departments, across schools at UB, we've got 6 schools of health out of our 12, and then we have many, many other health programs within other schools, such as the College of Arts and Sciences and engineering. So talk a little bit about the importance of collaboration, both from your own work as well as how you see that shaping discoveries of the future.
So I don't know how long ago, but I heard this saying that battles are won on the corners of maps, right? And it gets you thinking about the fact that real progress happens at borders between defined territories. So in research, that's where this collaboration lives and flourishes, the space between departments, disciplines, perspectives. So in my own work, we study the effects of brain injury, particularly ischemic stroke, on systemic inflammatory responses. And we, through conversations with pulmonary biologists, actually pediatric pulmonary biologists taking care of the tiniest of babies, asking questions about how their lung health defines long-term outcomes, a light bulb went off and we started investigating in collaboration with those teams, what if we manipulate the lung and what outcomes might one see in stroke? And we're finding very interesting signatures in that domain, which never would have happened if I hadn't struck up these conversations with a lab that was all the way down at the end of the hall, right? So your best idea is sometimes just a few minutes walk away. If you think about at Buffalo, what's going on here, we have biomedical engineers and neurosurgeons. They're co-developing real-time AI tools to improve brain aneurysm diagnosis and surgical treatment plans. There are folks in public health and computing scientists working together to think about how does genomic data inform cardiovascular risk across neighborhoods. We can think about our partners at Hotman Woodward working with structural biologists across the country to define protein structures and ways to turn those into therapies. And writ large, the Empire AI Initiative is collaborative in its very essence. I mean, we have computer science, we have engineering, we have data scientists. We are working across campus, really across the state, to think about how we use data at a meta level.
Yeah, and so I'm just going to take a little detour here, but you talked about stroke. And stroke is a multidisciplinary team sport. It starts out in the community. It goes to the emergency room doc who has to recognize something, the neurologist who is at the bedside in the emergency room deciding what treatment that you need in consultation with the neurosurgeon. And so we have a large number of strokes here in our area. And the work here that is across all the teams, and I'm sure there are many, many other parts of the teams, the radiologists, the nurses, all the people who take care of the patient and hopefully either alleviate the symptoms or minimize the symptoms of stroke. And then, of course, you've got the rehabilitation and everything. And it is across the continuum of team sport. Then you've got the basic science discoveries. So how do we pull those people together? Because what I just described in a very long sentence is the value of academic medicine. And stroke is a great example.
It is a great example. So academic medical centers, right, are unique incubators for discovery. Why? Many reasons, but not the least of which is bringing together people with different areas of expertise and figuring out how to solve complex problems. It's one thing to handle low-hanging fruit. How do you deal with the complexities of a disease that has a time-based element, that has high variability in terms of its disease expression and its mechanism, which it manifests, and then the sequelae of that. And you have to think systematically, you have to think quickly. So our teams are thinking about pre-hospital care. We're thinking about what are the right interventions when we have minutes to make those decisions. Then we're thinking about what was the root cause of this. And it brings into play all of those layers. We want to understand the imaging. Well, we want to use AI to define those images. What can we see hiding in those images, perhaps that tells us about a prior stroke we didn't know about? And then for that patient that has left the hospital but is still trying to get back on their feet, what can we do? What markers in their blood tell us about that recovery? Can we treat them with something that might help? And of course, what do we do to prevent the next stroke? So it takes more than a village. It takes an academic medical center to fix that.
And of course, we've just recruited Dr. Dan Wu, who is our new chair of neurology in partnership with our incredible neurosurgeons at our hospital. So, it's a great example of everybody working together to do the best for our community. If we could just talk a little bit, partnerships with health systems, particularly, hospitals and the community, is incredibly important. And so, we're working to bring in electronic medical record. We have deep partnerships with many, many of our hospitals and our other health systems and in the region. I would just say, do you see there even being a broader partnership, not only in Western New York, but across New York?
Yeah, so our hospital partners are integral to what we do. We are very symbiotic in that relationship. The patients in those hospitals, the physicians that are seeing those patients, the phlebotomists and the path labs that are bringing specimens down, it all feeds in a very reflexive, bidirectional manner. And taking a step outside of the immediate healthcare in our region, particularly in this time, the collaborations amongst the researchers is ever important. So we're looking at opportunities across UB, Roswell, University of Rochester, and thinking about our research infrastructure and how we might be able to partner there without having to spend money on duplicate equipment. Maybe we can borrow and share in that regard. And then at a higher level, the governor just announced a SUNY Brain Institute, which is resourced, and the intention of that is to be able to bring together the academic medical centers across SUNY, specifically neuroscientists, of which there are 600 plus, and look at ways in which we can share data, we can share biospecimens, we can share questions, we can develop multi-site studies. So they are on the absolute right track, and that this state has enormous potential to take those things that are hiding in plain sight and think about actionable paths to new therapies.
Yeah, so I think the message is that there's collaboration in every time we turn. And I think the changing environment has really pushed us to do that. So what about some clinical trials here? We have an opportunity, particularly with the Clinical and Translational Research Center. Of course, we've already talked to Tim Murphy, who was an amazing leader. But in terms of bringing more clinical trials to UB and to our patients, I think we're really set up with the implementation of the new community-wide electronic medical record and the strength that UB has already under Dr. Murphy's leadership. So what do you think the next stage is? Because I'd love to see UB be at the forefront of continued drug discovery and clinical trials.
So it's sort of the pros and cons of large systems, right? Large systems are complex, the collaborations are complex. All of this comes down to being able to codify data, being able to maintain that and trust or have our patients trust that the data they're sharing with us will remain in our architecture. So sometimes it's boring details of how we upload images and how we analyze them and what we're doing with laboratory information, right? So it's some of those sort of cruel details of making large organizations sing and get the data really to elevate out of those data resources. The training pipeline, being able to develop investigators that are asking the questions, that know how to navigate academic medical centers, but also the teams. So clinical coordinators, we need those partnerships. We need people that are in the hospitals working with patients and enrolling and working at bedside. And we need then back in the laboratories, the trainees that are interested in data science and are interested in understanding what goes into framing a clinical question and bringing it on to fruition. So there are a couple of examples I'd love to cite. So, one of these is the MATTERS program. So the problem is emergency departments often stabilize patients after overdose, but they fail to connect them with ongoing care during that really critical window of 24 to 48 hours. So Josh Lynch and Brian Clemency built MATTERS, which is a medication for addiction treatment and electronic referrals program. And it allows EDs to start buprenorphine and connect patients instantly to treatments in centers and pharmacies. So what has began in Buffalo now connects more than 250 treatment organizations, multiple referral sites, 1,000 pharmacies across the state, and it's expanding in other neighborhoods. So, the impact, it's thousands of life-saving treatments. EDs now are seen as gateways to recovery, and the state culture is really shifting. So this is just an extraordinary story with extraordinary impact. And then the other I will just briefly highlight that curative medications exist for hepatitis C, but there's a problem with adherence. And if you don't take the medications routinely, it does not do its job. So a team led by Doctors Andrew Talal and Mary-Anthony Marcoux developed a variety of interventions in the community, text reminders, video visits, real-time engagement to support medication compliance. And so their recent JAMA publication demonstrated significant gains in adherence, completion, and cure. I mean, you can only do this in systems of care.
And it's because they saw a clinical problem, partnered together to solve that. We're about ready to wrap up here, but what is one key takeaway, one thing that you want our listeners to know about research and the future of health in Western New York?
So I know the beginning of the conversation was really focused on basic science and basic research, but everything we've discussed, from molecules to proteins to organs to systems to communities, it's connected. So we are at an inflection point in biomedical research. We have computational tools at our disposal. We have the infrastructure that's prepared to study biology at scale. We can look at the genome, the proteome, the whole person, the family, the community. I don't see them as a different entity. I see them as a continuum. So I think we've got this opportunity to take large data sets, recognize health and disease signatures. I think Western New York is really uniquely positioned. We're small enough to be connected, but we're large enough to have real impact. And I think we're an incubator/laboratory for innovation.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it sets that there is a bright future for research here that's going to really have tremendous impact, not only in our community, but across our country. Mark, I want to thank you for sharing your insights and your real passion for discovery. Thank you to our listeners for joining us on this journey from the bench in the laboratory to the bedside. And I want to ask people to continue to stay tuned for more conversations that highlight the people and partnerships that are shaping the future of medicine here at the University at Buffalo.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.